The air was heavy with the scent of salt and strange plants that grew along the edges of the wide lake. The surface of the water glistened under the pale light of two suns that hung in the sky, casting a silvery reflection that rippled with every passing wave. Daniel walked slowly along the shore, his boots pressing into the soft, wet ground as he studied the horizon. He had been sent here to explore the outer edges of this alien world, and though he had seen many wonders during his travels, the silence of this lake unsettled him. It was too still, too quiet, as if the place was holding its breath. He paused for a moment, adjusting the small pack slung over his shoulder. His mind wandered to the thought of how far away Earth was now, and how different everything felt here. He missed familiar skies, but he knew he had chosen this life. He believed that if humans were to reach the stars, they had to face the unknown without fear. And so here he was, walking alone at the edge of a world that no other human had seen. Then he heard it, a sound unlike the whisper of water or the distant call of flying creatures. It was sharper, urgent, a splash followed by a faint cry. His eyes turned to the water, and at first he saw nothing but the restless waves. But then he caught sight of movement, a figure struggling against the pull of the deep. The shape was not human, its limbs slender, its skin reflecting light in strange colors. Daniel's heart raced as he realized someone was drowning out there. And it was no ordinary someone, it was an alien female. Without thinking, he dropped his pack and ran toward the edge. The cold water hit him as he leapt in, and the chill gripped his body like iron. Yet he pressed forward, his strokes strong and desperate. The figure flailed weakly, sinking with every passing second. Daniel kicked harder, pushing through the weight of his gear and the resistance of the waves. Every breath he took burned in his chest, but he could not stop. The closer he got, the more he saw of her. She had long, dark strands that floated like ribbons around her head, her skin glowing faintly beneath the water, and eyes wide with terror. She slipped beneath the surface before he reached her. Panic surged in Daniel's chest. He dived, plunging down into the murky depths, his vision blurred, but he stretched out his hand and felt her arm, cold, limp, but still alive. He wrapped his arm around her and pulled upward. His lungs screamed for air, but he refused to let go, breaking through the surface. He gasped and held her head above the water. Her body was heavier than he expected, her limbs awkward against his own. Yet he kicked with everything he had, dragging her slowly toward the shore. The distance felt endless. The waves pushed back and the current tried to pull them both under. But Daniel kept moving. His thoughts were not on himself, only on her. He could not explain why he cared so much, but he did know living being deserved to be lost like this. Not while he had strength left. By the time they reached the shore, his body was nearly numb. His arms ached, his chest burned, and every breath was shallow. He pulled her onto the wet ground and collapsed beside her. The alien female lay motionless, her eyes closed, her chest rising only faintly. Daniel's hands shook as he turned her onto her side, pressing against her ribs, urging her to breathe. He spoke softly, though he knew she would not understand his words. "Come on, you are not going to die, not like this, not now." For a moment there was only silence, broken by the sound of water dripping from their clothes and the waves lapping at the shore. Then she coughed, a weak sound followed by another. Water spilled from her lips, and she gasped for air. Her body trembled. As life returned to her, Daniel exhaled a heavy breath, relief washing over him as he watched her eyes flutter open. Those eyes were unlike any he had seen before, large, luminous, carrying a depth of color that seemed alive. She stared at him, confused, her breaths sharp and shallow. Daniel met her gaze and felt a strange weight in the moment. They were from different worlds, different species, yet, right then, none of it mattered. She was alive, and that was all that counted. She tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, a whisper of a language he could not understand. He shook his head gently and raised his hand in a calming gesture. "You are safe," he said softly, though he knew she could not grasp the meaning. She blinked slowly, watching him with a mixture of fear and wonder. Her hand weakly lifted from the ground, as if reaching toward him, but fell again in exhaustion. Daniel sat back, drawing in long breaths of the cool air. His body ached, but his mind was steady. He looked at her and realized that what had just happened was more than a rescue. It was a crossing of worlds, a moment where two lives touched in the most fragile way. A human had saved an alien, and though he had no idea what it meant for the future, he knew this moment would stay with him forever. The suns lowered slightly, casting long shadows across the shore. The lake rippled quietly as if the chaos from moments before had never existed. But for Daniel, everything had changed. He had not come here expecting to save anyone, yet he had done it without hesitation. And as he looked at the alien female lying beside him, breathing slowly, finding life again, he felt something stir deep within him. It was not pride or triumph, but a quiet sense of connection. Something told him this was only the beginning. The alien female lay on the ground, her body weak, her chest moving in slow, shallow breaths. Daniel knelt beside her, his own lungs still burning from the effort of dragging her from the water. His hands trembled. As he brushed the wet strands of hair from her face, he could see faint patterns glowing across her skin like threads of light, running along her arms and neck. They pulsed gently, dimming and brightening with each breath, as though her very life force was woven into those patterns. For a moment, Daniel thought she might slip away again. Her eyes closed and her body sagged against the wet earth. Panic rose in his chest. He pressed his hand against her ribs and leaned close, listening for breath. It was there, but faint, far too faint. He remembered the survival training he had been given before his mission, and though it had been years since he had practiced, he forced his mind to focus. He tilted her head back, pressed his ear close to her lips, and then placed his hands firmly over her chest. He pushed rhythmically, trying to force air back into her lungs. At first there was no response. The silence of the shore pressed down on him, broken only by the sound of his efforts. His mind screamed at him not to give up. He leaned down and forced air into her lungs, praying she would take it, praying her body would fight back. When he pulled away, he pressed his hands again, harder, stronger. His arms ached and his head swam, but he refused to stop. He thought of the look in her eyes just moments before she collapsed, that flash of fear mixed with the will to live. It gave him strength. Then suddenly she coughed. A harsh sound burst from her throat, followed by a spray of water. Her body jerked, and she gasped as air filled her lungs. Daniel quickly turned her onto her side, letting the water drain from her. He held her shoulders steady, whispering words she could not understand, but that carried the weight of his relief. "You are here, you are alive, do not let go." She shuddered, her breaths uneven, but stronger than before. The glowing lines on her skin flickered brighter with every breath, and Daniel realized it was a sign of her recovery. Her eyes opened slowly, wide pools of light staring at him with confusion and disbelief. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs failed her, and she collapsed back into the mud. Daniel caught her gently and lifted her head, resting it on his arm. She looked at him again, her lips moving weakly, sounds spilling out that carried the shape of her language but no meaning to him. He shook his head softly, placing a finger to his own lips in a sign of silence. She stilled, and for the first time, her breathing began to steady. Daniel looked at her more closely now. She was unlike any creature he had ever seen, yet there was something undeniably familiar about her. Her skin shimmered faintly with an inner glow, her features delicate yet strong. Her fingers curled slightly against his sleeve as if she feared he might leave. Her eyes, though strange in color, carried a weight of emotion he understood without needing words. She was alive because of him, and she knew it. The cold wind blew across the lake, and Daniel realized she was shivering. Her body, though alien, reacted to the chill just as his did. He quickly pulled off his outer jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She blinked at him, confused at first, but then her hand clutched the fabric as if she understood his intent. Her voice rose again, soft, broken sounds that trembled in the air. Daniel could not answer in her tongue, but he spoke anyway, his voice calm, steady. "You will be all right. I will not let anything happen to you." For a long while they stayed like that, Daniel supporting her weak body against his arm while she fought to regain her strength. The suns dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the surface of the lake. He could see her eyes flicking around as if taking in her surroundings once more. She must have been lost far from her people, stranded in waters too strong for her to survive alone. He wondered what had brought her here, and why she had been without help. But those questions would have to wait for now. All that mattered was keeping her alive. She shifted slightly and tried again to rise. Daniel helped her, gently lifting her into a sitting position. She leaned against him, her head falling against his shoulder. Her breaths came steadier now, though she was still weak. Her hand lifted clumsily, and she touched his chest as if searching for something. Her fingers pressed lightly against the rhythm of his heart, beating strong and steady beneath his shirt. She looked at him, then her eyes wide with something like wonder. Her lips moved once more, and though he did not understand the words, the tone carried gratitude. Daniel nodded, though he knew she could not truly grasp his meaning. It does not matter who you are, he thought. It does not matter where you come from. Life is life, and I will protect it. That was the truth of his action. He had not stopped to weigh the danger or the differences between them. He had simply seen someone drowning, and he had acted. That was what it meant to him to be human. As the light faded, the temperature dropped further. Daniel knew they could not stay by the water for long. If she was to survive, she needed warmth and shelter. He looked around the shore, spotting a small ridge not far away that could shield them from the wind. Carefully he lifted her into his arms. She was light, but her body trembled, weak from the ordeal. He carried her slowly, his steps steady across the uneven ground. She clung faintly to his jacket, her face pressed against his chest as though trusting him completely. When he reached the ridge, he set her down gently against the stone wall. He pulled out the emergency thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her fragile form. The glowing lines on her skin pulsed more evenly now, showing she was recovering. Daniel sat beside her, watching the sky as the first stars appeared above. This world was vast, unknown, and dangerous, but for the first time he felt he was not alone. She was beside him, breathing, resting and alive, because he had refused to let her sink beneath the waves. Her eyes opened once more, and she studied him in silence. Her lips parted, and she whispered something soft, the sound almost like a melody. Daniel could not understand the words, but he felt the meaning in his chest. She was thanking him not with language, but with the weight of her gaze. He nodded slowly, his own eyes meeting hers. "You are safe," he said again, though she could not know the words. She closed her eyes once more, leaning into the blanket, and finally letting her body rest. Daniel stayed awake, watching over her the whole time. He felt the ache of exhaustion heavy in his muscles, but his mind remained sharp. He knew deep inside that what had happened was not just chance. This was the start of something larger, something he could not yet see. He had saved her, but perhaps in ways he did not yet realize she would save him too. The night stretched long over the silent lake. The two suns had sunk beneath the horizon, leaving the sky painted with streaks of violet and silver. The air had grown colder, and the wind pressed softly against the rocks where Daniel and the alien female rested. He sat close to her, keeping the blanket wrapped around her fragile body, and every so often he checked her breathing. It was steady now, much steadier than before, and the glowing lines across her skin no longer flickered weakly, but moved with a calm rhythm. Daniel leaned back against the stone wall and let out a tired breath. His body still ached from the rescue. His arms sore, his chest tight, but he felt no regret. He looked down at her as she slept, her face calm beneath the faint glow of her skin. She seemed so different from him, yet at the same time so familiar. He thought of how close she had been to death, and how small the choice had felt to him when he dived into the water. It had not been a decision at all. It had been instinct. If someone was drowning, you tried to save them. That was how he had been raised. That was how humanity survived, not only with strength, but with compassion. When dawn finally broke, the sky turned a pale gold, and light spilled across the lake. The alien female stirred under the blanket, her eyes opened, slowly blinking against the brightness. She looked around with confusion at first, Then her gaze settled on Daniel, who sat a short distance away keeping watch. She studied him for a moment and then slowly pushed herself into a sitting position. Her body trembled. But she managed with his help. He offered her the small flask of water he carried in his pack. She took it hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his as she raised it to her lips. The water slid down her throat and her expression softened with relief. She lowered the flask and tried to speak. Her voice was soft, broken words of a language Daniel could not understand, but he listened carefully anyway. The tone was calm, gentle, filled with curiosity and something deeper. He shook his head slowly to show he did not know her language and pointed to his own chest. "Daniel," he said clearly, tapping twice. She tilted her head, studying him, and then repeated clumsily, "Daniel." Her voice carried his name in a strange accent, but it was clear. She then pressed her hand against her own chest and spoke a single word. "Lyra." Daniel nodded, understanding. She was telling him her name. He repeated it slowly, "Lyra." She blinked, her eyes bright with recognition, and for the first time her lips curved faintly into something like a smile. The distance between them seemed to lessen in that small exchange. They were still strangers from different worlds, but now they had names to hold on to. Names gave shape to connection. Names built trust. The day grew warmer, and Lyra's strength began to return. She tried standing, though she leaned heavily against Daniel for support. Her body was still weak, but her determination showed in every step. She looked at the water with visible fear in her eyes, and quickly turned away, clinging tighter to his arm. Daniel guided her carefully across the shore. He found berries growing nearby, and though unsure if she could eat them, he offered one first, tasting it himself to prove it was safe. She watched closely, then slowly accepted one. Her glowing patterns brightened faintly after she ate, as if her body was regaining power from even the smallest nourishment. As hours passed, their bond deepened. Though words were few, they spoke with gestures, with simple sounds. With the exchange of looks, Lyra would point at something and speak in her language. Daniel would repeat the sound, trying to learn. She would laugh softly when he mispronounced, but her eyes shone with patience and gratitude. In return, he pointed at objects in his tungstone water sky. She copied him slowly, sometimes struggling, but always trying. Their voices blended into the air like two children discovering language for the first time. When evening came, Daniel built a small fire using dried plants and pieces of driftwood. The flames cast dancing light across the rocks and reflected in Lyra's eyes. She sat close to the warmth, her gaze fixed on the fire as if she had never seen such a thing before. Her hand reached toward the sparks, not touching but tracing their glow with fascination. She spoke softly, her words rising and falling like music. Daniel could not understand the meaning, but the way she spoke carried reverence. After a long pause, she turned to him. Her eyes were serious, filled with a weight that had not been there earlier. She placed her hand over her chest, then pointed at him. Her voice was low but steady. The tone alone told him this was not casual. She was trying to tell him something important. Daniel tilted his head, waiting. She lifted her hand, then traced one glowing line along her arm, the light pulsing brighter under her touch. She whispered a word again, and again, her eyes fixed on him. Her expression showed both gratitude and determination. Daniel did not know the meaning, but he felt it. He sensed she was speaking of life, of survival, of what had passed between them. She was telling him that his act had not been ordinary, that for her people, perhaps it was something far beyond what they expected. He thought of her hand pressed weakly against his chest the night before, when she listened to his heartbeat. She had recognized his selflessness, and now she was trying to show him that it mattered. The night deepened, and the stars filled the sky. Lyra leaned closer, her body wrapped in the blanket, as the fire warmed them. She spoke again, this time slowly, deliberately. She pointed at the stars, then at him, then at herself. She repeated the motion, and finally touched the glowing pattern on her chest. Daniel understood only fragments, but the message was clear enough. She was saying their lives were now connected, bound by what had happened. He had saved her, and in her culture, in her people's belief, that bond could not be ignored. Daniel felt a strange unease mixed with wonder. He had never expected reward for saving her. He had never even thought about what might follow. All he wanted was to keep her alive, but now as she looked at him with unwavering eyes, he realized she meant to give him something in return, something that carried weight, something unimaginable, perhaps more than he could comprehend. He leaned back, staring into the fire, his thoughts tangled between fear and curiosity. He had no idea what awaited him. He knew this much: the rescue had changed more than one life, and the path ahead was no longer his alone. Fire burned low, and the night wrapped the lake in silence. Daniel sat close to Lyra, watching the faint glow of her skin as she rested. She had grown stronger over the last day, her breathing no longer weak, her steps firmer, though she still leaned on him when they moved across the rocky shore. He thought of how strange it felt to be bound so closely to someone he had only just met. Someone not even of his own kind, yet the bond between them felt unshakable. When the suns rose again, casting pale light over the world, Lyra stood by the water's edge, staring out across the endless waves. Her eyes carried a depth of thought, as if memories weighed heavy within her. She turned to Daniel, her lips moving carefully as she spoke in her soft language. He could not understand every sound, but her gestures guided him. She pressed her hand over her heart, then pointed toward the distant hills beyond. She whispered, slowly repeating the word, until Daniel caught its shape. Beyond, her voice carried urgency, mixed with something like hope. Daniel understood that she wanted to go somewhere far from the lake. He hesitated, thinking of her weakened state, but the determination in her eyes left no room for doubt. She needed to lead him to that place, and he realized that whatever she intended, it was tied to the debt she felt for her life. He nodded, slowly packing his few supplies and helping her wrap the blanket across her shoulders. Together they began walking toward the hills, leaving the lake behind. The journey was slow, the ground uneven and covered with sharp stones. Lyra moved with care, but her steps grew steadier with each hour. The sunlight reflected off the glowing lines of her skin, making her look like a figure touched by the stars. Daniel watched her closely, always ready to catch her if she stumbled. She glanced at him often, as if making sure he was still with her, and every time he gave a silent nod. The unspoken trust between them grew with each step. By the time night returned, they reached the base of the hills. The land rose steeply before them, covered in dark stone and strange plants that curled like spirals in the dim light. Lyra guided him toward a narrow path, almost hidden by the rocks. Her hand brushed against the stone, as if she recognized it. She spoke a word softly, one that sounded reverent, and then looked at Daniel with seriousness. She pointed upward and repeated the word again. Daniel could not grasp the full meaning, but he knew this was not an ordinary place. They climbed slowly, the path winding between jagged cliffs. The air grew cooler, and the wind howled through the gaps in the stone. At last they reached a plateau where the land opened into a wide, flat surface, surrounded by towering pillars of rock. The stars above shone brighter here, filling the sky with light. Lyra stopped at the center of the plateau and fell to her knees. Her hands pressed against the ground, and the glowing lines on her skin flared brighter, spreading from her arms into the stone beneath. Daniel stepped back in awe. The patterns of light rippled across the surface of the plateau like streams of water flowing in every direction. They traced lines along the pillars, curving into shapes that formed symbols he could not understand. The entire place began to hum with a low sound that vibrated through his chest. He looked at Lyra, her face calm, her eyes closed as if she was part of the stone itself. After a long moment, the light stilled, leaving the symbols glowing faintly around them. Lyra opened her eyes and looked at Daniel. Her voice carried strength, now her words slow, deliberate. She touched her chest, then pointed at him. She spoke a phrase again and again, her tone heavy with meaning. Daniel could not understand every word, but he felt the weight. She was telling him this was her gift. This was the reason she had brought him here. She rose slowly, walking toward one of the pillars. Her hand pressed against it, and a section of stone shifted open, revealing a chamber within. The air from inside was warm, filled with a strange metallic scent. Lyra gestured for him to follow. Daniel stepped cautiously behind her, his eyes wide with wonder. The chamber glowed with the same light as her skin, its walls covered in flowing patterns of energy. At the center rested an object unlike anything he had seen, a crystal-like structure, pulsing with inner fire. Lyra approached it with reverence. She turned to Daniel, her eyes shining. She spoke his name slowly, then pressed her hand over the crystal. The glow spread across her body, then flowed outward, touching the air itself. She pointed at him, and then at the crystal, her voice firm. He realized she was offering it to him, not as a token, not as a simple reward, but as something far greater, something her people must have guarded for generations. Daniel's chest tightened. He shook his head, trying to protest. He had never wanted anything for saving her life. He had acted because it was right, not because he sought reward. But Lyra stepped closer, placing her glowing hand over his heart. Her eyes locked with his, and she spoke in a whisper filled with emotion. The meaning was clear. Even without words, she would not let this debt remain unfulfilled. To her people, his act had broken all boundaries, and now she had chosen him to receive what no human had before. He looked at the crystal again, its light reflecting in his eyes. He felt the pull of it, something ancient, powerful, and yet strangely gentle. He understood that whatever it was, it could change him, perhaps even change humanity itself. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing the surface. The crystal pulsed in response, sending warmth through his skin. He gasped as visions flashed in his mind, glimpses of stars, of worlds unknown, of knowledge beyond measure. He pulled his hand back, trembling, but the connection had already been made. Lyra stood beside him, her hand still on his chest as if steadying him. Her voice was soft now, carrying comfort. She looked at him not with fear but with trust. She believed in him, believed he was worthy of what she had given. He swallowed hard, realizing the weight of the moment. He had come to this world as an explorer, but now he stood on the edge of something much larger. He was no longer just Daniel the Wanderer. He was the one chosen by a bond born in the waters of a distant lake. The chamber hummed softly, the glow of the crystal bathing them both in light. Daniel closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He had not asked for this yet. It had come to him through an act of selflessness. He knew that whatever path lay ahead, it would be forever shaped by this gift. He opened his eyes again, meeting Lyra's gaze. She gave a small nod, her expression calm yet certain. She had given him something unimaginable, and in that moment, he understood that his life would never be the same again. Chamber was silent, except for the low hum that echoed through the crystal. Its glow filled the walls with shifting light, and Daniel stood frozen with his hand still tingling from the touch. The visions that had rushed into his mind lingered like afterimages. He had seen great ships moving between stars, cities built of light and knowledge, carved into the very fabric of the universe. It was too vast to understand, and yet he knew it had become a part of him. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes steady on his face. She spoke softly, her words still foreign, but her tone filled with certainty. She touched her chest, then pointed at him, then at the crystal again. Daniel shook his head at first, trying to resist. He wanted her to understand that he had never asked for any of this. He had acted to save her because it was the only thing to do, but Lyra's gaze did not waver. She pressed her hand gently against his shoulder and gave a small nod. She was not offering him a gift because of duty alone. She was giving it because she believed he was meant to carry it. Daniel breathed slowly, the warmth of the crystal still pulsing through him. He looked around the chamber at the glowing symbols carved into the stone. He realized this was not just a secret place. It was a sanctuary, a vault of knowledge kept hidden for generations. Lyra's people must have built it long ago, guarding their power until the right moment came, and now she was giving it to him. Not because he was stronger, not because he was wiser, but because he had shown something they had forgotten. He had shown selflessness. The thought struck him deeply. He had not known if his act in the lake had meaning beyond the moment, but now he saw it through her eyes. Her people must have believed that. Outsiders thought only of themselves, yet he had proven otherwise. He had risked his life for hers without Hesitation, and in doing so he had touched something greater than either of them. Lyra lifted both hands toward the crystal, her glowing patterns flared brightly, and the chamber filled with a rush of light. She spoke his name, Daniel, her voice clear and strong. For the first time he felt the crystal answering her call. The light swirled around them, wrapping his body in warmth. He closed his eyes as the sensation flowed into him, not painful, not overwhelming, but steady like a river of knowledge pouring into his mind. When the glow faded, Daniel opened his eyes, and the chamber seemed brighter, sharper. He could see the details of every symbol etched into the walls, as though his sight had sharpened beyond human limits. His mind felt expanded, as if doors had opened to rooms he had never known were there. He looked at his hands. They trembled, but not from weakness. Something had changed in him, something permanent. Lyra watched him carefully, her eyes searching for his reaction. He met her gaze, and though no words passed between them, the understanding was clear. He had accepted the gift, and it had become part of him. He felt stronger, not in body alone, but in spirit. His thoughts carried clarity, his senses stretched farther than before. The gift was not just knowledge or strength, it was connection. It was the bond between lives made real and lasting. He stepped back from the crystal and looked at Lyra. She seemed relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. She touched his chest once more, her hand resting over his heart. Her glowing lines dimmed slightly, returning to their natural rhythm. She whispered something soft, a farewell, perhaps, or a blessing. He could not know for certain, but he felt its meaning in his chest. They left the chamber together, the stone wall closing behind them, sealing the secret once more. The stars shone above the plateau, brighter than Daniel had ever seen before. Each one seemed alive, burning with meaning. He felt their light not just with his eyes, but within himself. The gift had opened a new vision, and he could sense the vastness of the universe like never before. They descended the hills slowly, Lyra leaning on him when her strength faltered. Daniel felt no weight in helping her. His heart was calm, his mind steady. The bond between them was deeper than words could carry. She had trusted him with the greatest treasure of her people, and he had accepted it not out of desire, but because she needed him to. That trust bound them together in a way no distance could break. When they reached the shore of the lake again, the water reflected the twin suns rising. Daniel paused, looking at the surface, remembering the moment he had first seen her drowning. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet it had only been days. The same water that had nearly taken her life had brought them together and led him to this path. He wondered if fate or chance had guided his steps, but the answer no longer mattered. What mattered was what had grown from that moment. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes on the horizon. She spoke softly, pointing across the lake where distant shadows of her people's settlement flickered against the light. Daniel understood. She needed to return to them. She had given him her gift, but her life still belonged with her own kind. He felt a pang of sadness at the thought of parting, yet he knew it was right. She placed her hand gently against his arm, her touch light but steady. She looked into his eyes and smiled faintly, a gesture so small yet filled with warmth. Daniel nodded. He could not speak her language, but he spoke from his heart. "Be safe," he whispered, though he knew she could not understand the words. She tilted her head as if she felt the meaning all the same. She turned slowly, walking toward the distant settlement, her glowing patterns faint against the rising light. Daniel watched her until she vanished into the horizon. He stood alone on the shore, the waves lapping at his boots. The crystal's warmth still pulsed in his chest, reminding him of what had passed. He realized that the gift was not only for him, it was for all of humanity one day, if he chose to share it. He carried not just power, but the proof that compassion could bridge worlds, that a simple act of saving a life could ripple outward into something greater than he could ever imagine. Daniel lifted his eyes to the stars, still faint against the morning sky. He felt their call stronger than ever. The journey ahead was unknown, but he no longer feared it. He had faced the depths of water and the edge of death. He had seen the trust in the eyes of an alien who had become more than a stranger. and he had received a gift that would guide him for the rest of his life. He turned away from the lake and walked forward, his steps steady. His heart carried no pride, only a quiet truth. He had been human, and he had acted with selflessness, and that had been enough to change everything. The end.